Hey, Mark, how you doing today?
Great. How are you, Joe?
I'm doing good. I understand you interviewed a local Minnesotan for the next podcast.
I did, and this guy is the founder of Food Blogger Pro. He lives up here in the Twin Cities, and it was probably about 2 or 3 years ago. He emailed me just kind of out of the blue and said, "Hey, I'm the owner of Food Blogger Pro. I'd like to get together and just talk." And so he and I and a couple other guys, the founder of Gentleman's Gazette and another gentleman, get together about once a month. We just talk. We usually get together over lunch or coffee. We just talk, and it usually focuses on business, since we're all founders up here in the Twin Cities. Now, Bjork, who's the founder and the owner of Food Blogger Pro, is a fascinating story, in my opinion. His wife and he started a blog called Pinch of Yum, and they knew nothing at all about how to start a blog, how to monetize a blog, how to make it successful. And people originally were telling them, and the general thought when they started was that food blogs can get readership, but they're really hard to monetize. And so Bjork started out thinking, well, let's see if we can figure out how to actually monetize this and maybe pay the mortgage. Well, today, Food Blogger Pro and the affiliated sites with Food Blogger Pro it's a virtual empire in the food blogging world. Everybody knows who they are. They set up these inbound conferences and workshops where people will come to the space that they own in downtown Minneapolis, a really cool space, to learn things like photography for photographing food, how to write, how to turn out content on a regular basis, how to do video, and they're really teaching and lifting up that entire industry. On top of that, Bjork talks in this interview about how he got from really not knowing how to even work with a Tumblr blog to becoming a multifaceted entrepreneur in the online world.
That's pretty incredible. I love stories like that. I know nothing about most of what you just said, other than I love the fact that he just contacted you out of the blue. When you and I go to these events, it's hard to get out of your introverted shell, which I think you and I both are a little bit, and walk up to somebody and say, "Hi, I heard your presentation. I'd like to chat." I love the fact that he did that. And it's the way to make new friends and new relationships in this industry. It's a great idea. Great success story. I love everything you've said about it. And you and I have talked about him for a couple of years now. So let's just jump right into it and get to the podcast.
Hey, Bjork, thanks for joining me for this little talk.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here, Mark. Yeah, it's an honor.
For all three of the people watching this, I've known Bjork now for probably 2 years now.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you feel like you're old friends, but then you think about it, and it's like, oh, it hasn't actually been that long. So it'll be an easy conversation, I think. But a lot of that comes from our previous chats, and so we have a decent amount of history at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we get together, Bjork and I and a couple other guys here up in the Twin Cities in Minnesota about once a month just to talk business. Everyone here is a business owner in this group, and I guess it's like a mastermind group, but we don't really.
It's a really loose one, yeah.
Yeah,
That
right.
has to do with like how it's structured and who structures it, which is me. But yeah, we kind of end up meeting for lunch once every couple months. But I feel like organically, because of who it is, naturally the conversations happen around business and best practice and things like that. And it's also a great group. Maybe this is a quick little side tip, but I feel like we have this really unique pull where we have somebody from kind of a fashion and men's blog, and then somebody from kind of a DIY home blog. We have a food blog, which we can talk about a little bit, and then you have Quiet Light and the other projects that you're involved with. And so we all kind of are able to talk from our different industries, which is really fun.
Yeah, they're great times. So I'm really bad at networking, and you're the one that reached out to me. I'm really glad you did because it's been a highlight whenever we get together once every couple of months, which we got to get together again soon. It's been,
that'll be a side note. We'll do
yeah, right. All right. So before we for again the 2 or 3 people watching it, the reason I wanted to have you on is I think your story is so cool. Like I love the story here, and I'll tell just a little bit from what I know of it, and then let you tell the story. But basically, you're in the food blog industry. And when you guys started, people were telling you that you couldn't really monetize food blogs.
Yeah.
You couldn't make money from them. I've got a little personal history with this because I started a site years ago where, my attitude was, if you have eyeballs, you can make money. But it was a lot harder than I thought. And you guys have actually made money from food blogs. Not only made money, you guys have kind of blown the lid off the industry and shown a lot of other people how to do it. Can you share with people your story and your background, how you guys got started with Pinch of Yum?
Yeah, absolutely. So this 2010, Lindsay started publishing recipes on social media. We were married. We'd been married for just a year at that point. So she's starting to become more interested in cooking meals for the two of us and kind of getting into the cooking scene a little bit more than she was in college. So I was posting those on social media, kind of got to the point where I was like, maybe that's not the best avenue or venue for this. People probably don't follow me on social media because they want to see all the recipes I'm making. It's friends and family that want to know what I'm doing in life. And so we're like, maybe there's a different path or a different place that we can do that. And at that same time, I had been listening to, I was really interested in online business, and I was really interested in business in general and finance and things like that. So I'd listened to a lot of audiobooks. I loved audiobooks and podcasts as well. And one of the books I was listening to was a book called Crush It by Gary Vaynerchuk. Didn't have any idea who he was. It was just one of the recommended books on Audible. So I started listening to it, and I'm sure people here are familiar with who he is. Super entertaining, really off the cuff, very not Minnesota, or at least my understanding of who Minnesota people are. So that was kind of interesting. He's kind of this, East Coast business guy who is just unfiltered. And so it was a really fun book to listen to. But one of the things that he talked about in this book was, if you're passionate about anything, there's going to be an avenue in the online world, on the internet, in order to create an income from that. And the example he always gave in the book was this worm farm. If you love worms, you can start a worm blog, and eventually there's going to be people who come to you and want to advertise about worm farms. Funny enough, side note, my brother just started a worm farm. So I'm like, there's something full circle about this. In his garage, I've never actually even told him that story. I talked about it, so I'll have to check in. I'll have to see if he was influenced by an online influencer that he follows in the worm farm industry. But that really inspired me, as it coincided with Lindsay's interest in publishing recipes and food. So there's kind of this cross section where it was Lindsay saying, "Hey, I wonder if this is a place for publishing these," and this other overlap of, you can create a business around this. And so she started a blog, and I was interested from a behind the scenes perspective of, if we could spin that into something, create something from that, that would be, at that point, thought about, not this business, but maybe it was income that would be able to pay for coffee. Or my big dream was like, hey, maybe we can cover our mortgage payment with the income from this blog. So in 2010, we started on a Tumblr site. So we got a custom domain on Tumblr, and just started to try and learn, like, okay, first thing was like, how do you publish a post that has photos and words in the post at the same time? And we couldn't really figure that out. And so it was these tiny, tiny, tiny steps along the way. But we really stuck with it, and Lindsay stuck with it. And I was working behind the scenes and stuck with it. And to make a really long story really short, over a long period of time, 7 years, we continued to take steps each and every day, doing things like going on video interviews, or getting up early and publishing content before we went into work, or me doing a lunch break and watching courses on how to use WordPress. And cumulatively, over 7 years, what happened is we were able to build on top of the small successes that we had. And there's really small successes in the beginning, like figuring out how to include photos and words in the same post, or having a day where you figure out how to put ad code on the site, and you make 2 cents. You're like, oh, if I can do this, then maybe I can make 4 cents tomorrow. And figuring out how to do that, and just being really fascinated with the process, not for the end goal of having a site that makes money, but with the end goal of enjoying the work and the process along the way. And that's really been a huge part of our story, is figuring out how can we continually become interested and engaged in this work over a long period of time. And we found that to be the best solution for building a business, especially in a business that is in a niche that, like you said, maybe normally wouldn't be one where you think, hey, this is going to be really easy to build a business around.
That's interesting. So when you guys were building this initially, and your goals, like you said, they weren't necessarily we want to make millions of
Right.
dollars from this.
Right.
It's pay for the mortgage, maybe as the big dreams.
Mm-hmm.
For somebody who is in a business, I want to talk about goal setting.
Yeah.
How do you do that sort of continual daily improvement
For sure
with a business?
Yeah.
What you guys really focus on?
Yeah, I think for us, it's a combination of focusing on like having a little bit of an idea of what the really big thing is, while also keeping the micro in mind. And for us, I think an example of the big thing would be Lindsay just recently, and recently is relative. I would say it's been the past year and a half, 2 years. Maybe she was inspired when we met. That's what it was, the 2-year mark. And then our meeting, no, that wasn't it. But it was probably 2 years ago that she started doing workshops. And that was a really big goal. And for us, what that looks like then is breaking that down into micro. So what does that look like? Well, one of the things we need to do is figure out where are we going to do these. And instead of finding an actual space that we land on, the first step was, hey, how do we get into a spot that allows us to test to see if we even like doing this? So we rented a space for just a weekend in order to do a workshop. And the workshops were around food photography, actually. So that's something that Lindsay is really passionate about and interested in teaching. And so we have this big goal. We want to do workshops, add that as a piece of the puzzle for Pinch of Yum. Micro goal, how do we get there, and break that down? I think that's one of the things that often happens when people think about a macro big goal, is that they focus just on the big goal instead of then breaking it down into the really small steps that get you there. So I think that's one of the ways that we approach goals in terms of like really setting specific numbers for, hey, we want to do X amount of page views this year. That's not something that we've really focused on. And that doesn't mean that wouldn't necessarily be advice for people that are listening that you shouldn't do that. But what we've found is we have the most success when we focus on what we call user-controlled analytics. And user-controlled analytics are the things that we can control directly instead of focusing on the things that are outside of us. Page views would be an example. I think that would be a symptom of doing a really good job of focusing on user-controlled analytics. So user-controlled analytics would be, we do a podcast for food blogging, right? That's our niche. So we want to do one podcast every week. That's something that we can control. We might also have some ideas, like I really want to get to 10,000 downloads per podcast. That's a goal that I have, but I'm not focusing on that as much as I'm focusing on the user-controlled analytics, which is, okay, we need to have podcasts every week. We need to have a queue of 1 month to 2 months of interviews and have that be really consistent. So we're not necessarily people that will have like huge goals set up of like, hey, we want to, do 20 million page views by 2019. We focus more on the user-controlled analytics that we can really have an impact on immediately, that will impact then maybe some of the things that we'd usually consider to be significant analytics, like page views or revenue or all of those metrics that you're so acutely aware of in your industry.
Well, so with that, I mean, how do you make sure that what you're doing is successful? Because, for example, we've got these video podcasts, and right now,
yeah,
you and I are recording this. You're going into our queue because we have the same user-controlled analytics. Yep. We want to have a queue of about 10 of these episodes built up. But one of the concerns is, oh boy, what if we do all these and then my joke about 3 viewers is not a joke, but a reality. So where does that come in? Where you go back and you take a look at those bigger outside things outside of your control,
right? And
how does it influence your user-controlled analytics?
Yeah, I think that for me, and I think this is probably true for Lindsay as well, that a lot of what we do, I think we are based first and foremost on gut and feel, and then second on actual numbers. Now, there's also actual numbers that I'm extremely aware of, like in my bag right now. I can do this because it's a video podcast, but this is an older book, but I'm reading, You Should Test That. It's like a A/B testing. So it's not like I'm against analytics or don't like analytics or I'm extremely fascinated by A/B testing and small incremental improvements and things like that. But I think that one thing that people so often forget is that when they are, like this video interview as an example, for you, if it's something that you're also getting benefits from outside of just views, like that's one spoke on the wheel. And so if there's 7 spokes on the wheel, some of those might be you're also networking and you're getting to connect with people that really get to know, like, and trust you. And maybe those people become clients. So that's like an ancillary benefit. Maybe also you're fine tuning your ability to speak on the fly. And that is really beneficial for the next time that you speak. So I think there's also these things that are folded into the work that we do that we don't consider. So I'm also really interested in those. So for our podcast, for example, that first year, it's the same thing where you have, hundreds or maybe a few thousand people listening to it. And it feels like for the amount of work, it's not worth it if you're just looking at the number of downloads. But what I realized was there's other things that are happening within those podcasts. Like I said, I'm connecting with people. I'm getting better at speaking. I don't get nervous now when we schedule it. Part of it is because I like you and you're so easy to talk to, but also because I've done 115 podcast interviews. So I feel very comfortable doing this now. So I think there are other benefits that need to be factored in to those. And I think one of the biggest things in this world that we live in is not necessarily how do I scale something as quickly as possible, but how do I continue to stay committed to something and figure out ways to get better along the way? And I think if you do that, we call that 1% infinity. So how do you get a tiny bit better every day for an extended period of time? And I think what so often happens is in the first year, in the first 2 years, in the first 3 years, people are focusing on their metrics or their analytics too much. And that is the gasoline in the car. And there's not enough gas in those first years in order to sustain them. And so you have to find other types of gas. And that gas would be, are you enjoying it? Is it something that you're interested in? Are there other benefits like we talked about that you can think about and focus on that go into it? That allows you to stay committed to that for a long period of time, which also is one of the biggest factors that we've seen in success of sites, especially in the niche that we're in. I think the other really important piece is, like, you can't just do something for a long period of time. You have to figure out how to improve it. And I think that's where the analytics and the metrics come in, where you look at things, and I'll use our podcast again as an example. When we look at the show titles, we can see how significant just the name is in terms of the downloads. And you hear that all the time, where, like, if you write a post, spend 75% of your time writing the title and 25% writing the post. But we see that with podcasts as well. So that's one of the ways that we've thought about how can we get better about naming. What are the trends that we see with if we include revenue numbers in the podcast title versus if we don't. And that's where the analytics would come in. And I think that's where some of this, like, you should test that A/B testing kind of philosophy comes in with it. So I think it's both. I think it's in some ways the yin and the yang of the gut and the analytics. I think so often we can focus on the numbers because they're so easy to track. But what can happen is that can be discouraging early on, which can keep you from being committed for a long period of time, which is what we've found to be really important.
That's interesting. There's actually 2 directions I want to go here from this. So I wrote them down here. I'm going to address both of them. But you're actually the second person that I've heard probably within the last 4 months talk about this idea of these ancillary benefits, which might not be as measurable. I think in the online world, people coming from the offline world into the online world, one of the things that we love, that they love about the online world is just how you can measure everything down to these micro conversions, right? Somebody visited 2 pages, so they must be a little bit more interested than the person who visited 1 page. And we get that granular. Well, I was at the Smart E-commerce conference with Ezra Firestone. Yeah, he built an 8-figure business. And one thing that he said in his conference, and I've heard him say this a few times, is that even if he has an ad campaign which appears to be losing money, even if he's losing money in something, he still believes in investing in the business because he believes that does pay off down the road. And he alluded to this idea of these ancillary benefits. And it's something that I've been looking at more and more. And you're spot on. I mean, we're doing this
Yeah.
podcast, video podcast, for a few reasons. One is for viewership, but also the networking, and there's a lot of other benefits that we've had in mind when we started this. So I think that's a fascinating point. The second point that I want to go down this road here with you a bit is applying this idea of this continual small improvement to acquiring a business and building it. Now, you guys, built Pinch of Yum ground up, Food Blogger Pro from the ground up. I know you're looking right now a little before an acquisition. I don't know where you are in that. We don't have to go into that, but applying those principles to acquiring a business. As you know, I just bought a business. It's an overwhelming feeling, right? Because I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much to do here. And I was just taking inventory. It's October. It's been about 6 months since I bought the business, and we've actually done quite a bit in 6 months, but it doesn't feel that way. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that. How do you prioritize those small projects? Because I have big goals for the acquisition. But there's probably 100 things I could work on. How do you figure out which one? And you've used a word with me in the past, which I've introduced into my lexicon here, and that is this idea of mental bandwidth. So how do you prioritize things like that, and how do you figure out what you're going to spend your time on?
I think a question that I wanted to ask you that I think is really interesting, because as you mentioned, I'm really interested in business acquisitions. I think what's exciting to me is about acquiring something kind of, it's like our version of fixer upper, where like you buy a house that needs a lot of work and you can do that. And it could do a on it because it would be extremely boring, right? It'd be like tweaking the email funnel or something like that. But like what it would look like to be Chip and Joanne of online businesses, and that's really interesting to me. But I'd be interested to hear you, and I'll maybe talk a little bit about that, but like the before and after of, do you feel like when you were looking at the site that you were thinking about acquiring and then acquired it, do you feel like, were you as excited to work on this after as you were before? Like, was that a good match coming from looking at it, seeing, ooh, this opportunity, getting into it, and then saying like, this is fun to work on, or was it different, or like, what was that process like?
It's fascinating. It's been actually very much like starting a business, where there are some days that I'm super excited, some days I wonder what I did. The difference is I did an SBA loan, so the difference is the days that I wonder what I did, I realize I've got this big old debt hanging over my head, so I don't have a choice to give up on it. But I think I actually got more excited after I acquired the business, because I'm seeing more and more what opportunities are there. I think I actually underestimated the opportunity. I underestimated the work, and I think that's almost always the case with somebody who buys any business. You underestimate how much work it's going to take, because you just can't get to know a business intimately, no matter how much due diligence you do, until you get in and run the day to day.
Absolutely.
I'm still really excited about it. We're like a month and a half away from some pretty big milestones. And it's that kind of butterflies nervousness of, for sure, boy, I hope this works. Right. I mean, I hope this works, because we put a lot of time and energy into it. So anyways,
the reason that I ask is because that's one of the things I've been thinking about with the acquisition process. And there have been things like on a small scale that we've bought before, like somebody had an ebook that they had that they were selling kind of in our niche, and she sold her site and then wanted to sell this ebook. So we purchased that, and have kind of learned in small increments that I think one of the ways that you need to prioritize your work is thinking about what are the things that you usually prioritize. Meaning, when you sit down at your computer, what are the things that you naturally go to work on? And I think you need to be honest with yourself and saying, are these things that I go to, and are they important? Like that two-prong factor of, not only do you naturally go there, but it's also really important to do those things. An example would be A/B testing. Like that's a really important thing. And if you're naturally drawn to that, then that's probably something you should prioritize. And so that's what we've been intentional about doing. A really small example would be, like if we're interested in hiring somebody, I really hate the process of putting all of that documentation together in order to go through the hiring process. Lindsay loves that. And so I'm not going to prioritize for myself doing those things, but Lindsay should, because she enjoys that. She has a background as a teacher. Like, she's really good at taking documents and a process and putting that together, whereas I'm not as excited about it. I love the idea of jumping on a podcast interview, a video interview, or doing a podcast interview with people. But there are other people that wouldn't like that. And so that shouldn't be a priority for them. So I think it's looking at the things that are possible on that list. And I think literally it's sitting down and saying, like, writing a list. What are the things that we could do and what is the impact that they can have? And maybe it's a spreadsheet, maybe it's a rough, note, you have a notebook and you jot it down in a, moleskin or something like that. And then looking through those things and saying, just circle, what are the things that are high impact and that I'm excited about? And those should be the things that you prioritize, because those are going to be the things that you're going to expend your energy on without it getting all the way to zero really quickly. There are other things where if I'm doing them, it's like when running on your, I'm using as many props as possible because it's a video interview, but it's like when an app running on your phone that has like location services on, and it just drains the battery. I think that's an example of people probably can understand that those type of activities that they do that are just draining their battery. So find the things that are the important apps for you to run, the important projects for you to do that don't drain your battery quickly. And then for the other things, I think it's either A, not doing them, just being okay not doing them, even if they're important, but realizing that just because something is important doesn't mean that you're going to be good at doing it. So either not doing them or finding somebody that doesn't get drained as much as you do to come in and help with that. And it sounds like kind of obvious advice that we're all familiar with. But I think the important piece of it that we often forget is, I think we so often focus on the things that are going to be the highest and then try and push through and do those when it's such a drain. But I think we need to be acutely aware, self-aware of who we are and what gives us energy in the work that we do, and then find the areas of opportunity and let those be the priorities, knowing that you will be leaving opportunity on the table, but it's opportunity that would have been hard to get anyways, because you would have so much resistance as you try and get it.
Yeah, you said a lot in there that honestly speaks to me. I think any entrepreneur can relate with this idea that we have this kind of romantic view of the entrepreneur as the grinder, the guy who's going to, in spite of the objections and sometimes the difficulties, is going to grind through and get stuff done.
Yes. Yep.
But I mean, in 10 years of doing this, I can tell you that you do get worn out and eventually things stop getting done. That's actually one of the reasons that we started doing the video podcast is writing content. And you and I have talked about this when we get together. You know how much it's been a drain on me recently. So the idea is, well, maybe I can write a little bit less if we start doing different forms of media, and it'll be more fun for me to do this. So
I think it's one of the great I wouldn't say fallacies, but I would say I think it's one of the important things for entrepreneurs to understand is the nuanced relationship between grit, which is really important. It's a huge piece of it to do things that you don't want to do. Same with like exercise and eating well. Like, we all understand that it's not necessarily the kind of thing where everybody's super excited to go for a 5-mile run. There are people that are excited about it, but so there is some reality of grit. But I think also, I think it's important to not fall too in love with grit and become romanticized, like you said, with this idea of being miserable. And I think so often that can be what's communicated, is that you have to put in 19-hour days doing stuff that you don't enjoy. Sometimes there will be 19-hour days, not often, hopefully. But within those days, I think it's going to be a lot easier to have those be long, really dedicated days if you are doing something that isn't causing you to drain that battery quickly.
Yeah, I think that's phenomenal advice. So we're right up against the amount of time that we have allotted for this. I feel like we could probably talk for a couple hours like we normally do. But hey, thanks so much for coming on. And, I think the kind of big takeaways from this is this idea of continual improvement and focusing on those things that are in your control, understanding what's a symptom of your business, such as some of the metrics and what you're doing, and what's directly under your control. As you said, the user controlled analytics. I think those are some fantastic takeaways. Fantastic takeaways.
Yeah, that would be my hope. Would be the one way is this idea of more than anything, 1%. Getting a little bit better every day for a long period of time, and not thinking about it as 1 year, but thinking about it as 5 or 10 years. I think that relieves some of the pressure that we feel as entrepreneurs of we need to make this thing happen overnight, or we need to happen in 6 months. So much can be done in a long period of time. And I think people underestimate that. And I think to lengthen that time period, to work really hard every day, to get a little bit better, but to not put the expectation of it needing to happen in 6 months, I think is going to be beneficial for entrepreneurs. And I think you'll see that it will happen actually pretty quick if you're able to find those things that you're really able to invest in and spend a lot of time in, and have that combination of the grit plus passion.
Fantastic. Bjork, thanks so much for agreeing to come on the show here.
Yeah, really fun to chat, Mark. Thanks for having me on.